Welcome to the Winning Hand Podcast, the podcast all about Marvel Champions, one card at a time. I am your host, Boom Guy, and if you cannot tell from the excitement in my voice, we have a very, very special bonus episode today. Welcome to episode 43.5, which is an interview episode with our special guest today, which I will introduce momentarily. I'm joined by my co-hosts, as always, Lazy Titan. What's up, man?
How's it going?
And Lethus. How's it going?
Hey, what's up?
And drum roll, please. Thank you for the drum roll. I'm going to have to edit out that sound now.
Yeah, great for a podcast.
Don't ask for it if you don't want me to do it.
You can't handle the drum roll.
Welcome, Maxine Newman.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for taking the time to be on this podcast. The 7 people who listen to this are very excited, I know.
There's
my
8
pleasure.
now.
Yeah. Listeners, usually we do one card at a time. This is going to be slightly different. So if you were here for one card at a time, you should stop and go back and listen to episode 43 and wait for 44 next week. But this is going to be talking to Maxine about the design process, a little behind the scenes, about some of the stuff that she designed specifically, but then generally how things work at FFG. And I'm sure it'll go all over the place from there. So to start, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your story with FFG and Marvel Champions?
Sure. So I joined FFG in 2012. I originally started working on the Lord of the Rings card game. Back then, they were working on lots of these called Nightmare decks, which are like products that enhanced existing products. So they kind of signed me on board to do those, but slowly over time, I started taking over more and more responsibilities for that game until eventually I got the chance to design my own cycle for that game, which was the Dream Chaser cycle, and also most of the Angmar cycle before that. And from there, I went on to become one of the 2 lead designers for Arkham Horror, the card game, which was obviously an incredible experience. That came out in 2016, I think, won all kinds of awards. And but like the LCG department at Fantasy Flight was very collaborative at the time, and we all had our own like little room that we hung out in. And so we would help each other out on all kinds of things, and it turned out that I got to design a few hero packs for Marvel, which we'll talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah. And so you said 2012 you started at FFG, and 2016 is when Arkham came out. Mm-hmm. When did you start working on Arkham? Like how far before 2016 did you begin that process?
I feel like it was a solid year, maybe year and a half. But also when, if I remember correctly, and again, this was so long ago at this point that my memory might be a little spotty, but it came out in 2016 in October as part of like a pre-release kind of event at the Game Center for Arkham Knights. And then it didn't like officially come out in stores until like a few months after that. So technically it might have been 2017 when it came out. Like globally, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think I started in like early 2015, if not late 2014. Nah, it must have been 2015 because I was working on Lord of the Rings for a while.
And so would you say it's the same basic lead time? You know, Marvel Champions came out in 2019. Was it about a year and a half before that came out? Are you aware of it at all? Or you knee-deep in Arkham?
I was knee-deep in Arkham at the time, but like I said, like it was very obvious, like I was able to observe a lot of the development process for Marvel and for Legend of the Five Rings and Game of Thrones 2nd edition and every card game that comes out. It's like I said, it's a lot more collaborative than you might think. And I definitely participated in a lot of like early playtests for that for Marvel. So I was able to observe that process like all throughout. And I would say it was about the same amount of time, about a year, maybe a year and a half. Yeah.
I think you are probably best known for Arkham Horror in the FFG world. Mm-hmm. And as you said, it won a bunch of awards. Humble brag. That's fine. You're allowed to do that here.
Your name has come up very positively among a lot of my friends for Arkham Horror.
That's cool.
Yeah. I have played quite a bit of Arkham Horror myself. I'm currently playing through the Dream Eaters cycle, my first time through. So
Nice.
don't tell me what happens. I'm 3 scenarios in, so we'll see how it goes, listeners.
Awesome.
But if you were going to, you're speaking here to a Marvel Champions audience, and that's, I'm assuming, what they primarily play. How would you pitch Arkham Horror to Marvel Champions players? Like, how do you think it's comparable? Where do you think it's different? What do you think it offers that Marvel Champions maybe doesn't?
There are definitely similarities and also major differences. I would say the big similarity is, like in Marvel Champions, you're playing as a singular character. And you might have allies that pop up from time to time, but for the most part, you are one person. And your deck represents all of that character's abilities and equipment and spells and whatever other things that they might have, including like allies. The major difference is, instead of being a superhero with all kinds of like earth-shattering abilities, you're just a normal person. You're a normal person, sometimes a little bit more than normal, but for the most part, you're just a normal person with normal person abilities. And the items that you have access to, and it's set in the 1920s, so the items that you have access to are just any piece of equipment that might have existed in the 1920s until you start getting into the higher level artifacts and relics that have like supernatural abilities. As far as gameplay is concerned, the major difference between the two games is, instead of fighting a boss, like Marvel is you versus an enemy, right? And that enemy's minions and such. In Arkham, each scenario has its own storyline that has objectives that are completely different from one scenario to another. So you might have one scenario where you're investigating and you're going around like a haunted house trying to look for clues, but you might have another scenario where you're defending a position against hordes of enemies, or another scenario where you're running through a train as like a huge gateway is sucking up train cars into it, and it's like a chase sequence. And very, very often there isn't a giant boss or a big enemy to fight. Sometimes there is. But a lot of times the game is more about investigation and it's like a mystery game, so like discovering the truth, than it is about just raw combat,
Yeah. No, I think one of the big differences you would get right away is just visually on the table. There's a map that you're moving around. Like there's different locations, and that is not at all present in Marvel Champions. So I think that's like right away when you look at it, it's striking how different it looks. But
yeah,
there are some similarities, and I want to ask you about some cards. I know you don't have the card pools of all these things memorized, but for example, I've also played Lord of the Rings, as you mentioned you have. And I recently stumbled on a card that has the same title in all 3 games.
Yeah.
Marvel Champions,
Yep.
Arkham Horror, and Lord of the Rings. The card is Ever Vigilant,
Yep.
which listeners here will know as the protection card, 2 costs, where you ready a hero and remove 2 threat from a scheme. It also exists in the other 2 games, but it does totally different things. How much of that is accidental, and how much of that is just people are working on games together and they pick titles they think were cool from one game and move it to another one? Are there cards that you know of that are the same, that do the same thing basically?
I'm sure there are some cards that are unintentional, but for the most part, it is intentional. It's a way for us to like cross-reference these games, and you might, if you play more than one, you might find this card and be like, oh, Ever Vigilant, like neat. That card is in Lord of the Rings, or that card is in Arkham. And if we can get the effect to line up, like even better. And the perfect example for that one actually is a card called A Test of Will. I don't know if that card title exists in Marvel, but it's in Lord of the Rings and Arkham, and it does almost the same thing in both of them, which is pretty awesome.
Interesting.
And I even took the flavor text from the Lord of the Rings version, which was a quote from the book, and rephrased it for the flavor text for the Arkham version.
Oh, wow. Okay. Now I got to dig through my cards and read, because that's interesting.
It's pretty great, yeah.
Why does it say Mithrandir on my Arkham card?
I think Desperate Defense is in at least 2 of them too.
I wouldn't
think
be
Desperate Defense
surprised,
is in Lord of the Rings and Marvel.
It
I don't know
sounds
if it's
like an Arkham card.
I don't know if it's in Arkham,
I'm
but
pretty sure
it's
it's
the
in
only one I
Arkham.
know.
I'm pretty
it's in
sure.
the other 2.
I'm pretty sure Desperate Defense. Oh man,
It is
I could
not
be
in
wrong.
Arkham.
It's definitely in Lord of the Rings, and I'm trying to remember if I designed it or not. either me or Caleb.
Wait, did I make that card?
That's pretty great.
I'm pretty sure there's a Desperate Defense in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, there is. It's
There
a
is
spirit
in
card.
Lord of the Rings and in Marvel.
It kind of does
Yeah,
the
but
same
I'm not
thing
sure if it's
as it does in Marvel,
It's
but
like
there
you
isn't one.
defend
in
and
Arkham.
get +1 defense and then ready, or something
Yep.
like that. Yeah.
Yep. Basically.
Yep. I think Caleb designed that. So yeah, it's a neat way for us to. I mean, it's also kind of a time saver because we have these cool ideas from these previous games. Why not utilize them? But it's also just a neat little way to reference these other games, and this was especially evident in the Warhammer games back in the day. There was a Warhammer Invasion card game, which was Warhammer Fantasy, and there was a Warhammer 40k card game called Conquest. And there were a lot of obviously those two properties share a lot of DNA. So there were a few cards that were shared between the two of them, like the Dark Elves and the Dark Eldar both had a card that was just called Hate, and it did a very similar thing. So it's kind of a tradition at this point.
Okay, so let's circle back a little bit to Marvel Champions here. I got us off track with the card titles. I just thought that was cool. So when did you kind of start with Marvel Champions? Were you in on the initial planning and designing before it came out? Did you come on board after release? Is that something that you wanted to do, or did they come looking for you?
So I definitely was involved in a couple discussions early on, and most of which like very, very basic, very early discussions about like how do we differentiate this game from Arkham? What are the strengths of the Marvel property, and like what kinds of things can we tap into that are different from like an Arkham? And I've touched upon some of those, like the super powered, like I remember like there were a lot of discussions about how we wanted Marvel characters to feel like they were larger than life. And one of the ways that the team accomplished that is through drawing up your hand every round. Whereas in Arkham and also in Lord of the Rings, you're pretty much drawing one card every round unless you have other cards that can let you draw more cards. So you feel a little bit weaker, but in Marvel you feel much stronger. So we had a few discussions about that, but like I wasn't super duper involved for most of the game's creation. There were already a lot of cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. And it wasn't until, let's see, the game hadn't come out yet, and the core set was still in development when they started the first cycle, which is pretty common for FFG LCGs, because they have such an aggressive development cycle. And I definitely wanted to. It was kind of both, to answer your question of like, was I pulled in or did I ask to be involved? They definitely needed some help because there was just so much content to make for that first cycle. But I also definitely volunteered. I was like, me, pick me. Because I had played the game a bunch of times. I was excited for it. I'm a big Marvel fan. So it was kind of like a perfect side project for me to work on. But I was still knee deep in Arkham at that point, so I couldn't handle too much stuff. So they threw one hero pack at me. And I got to choose between all of the Wave 1 heroes. And I immediately choose Black Widow because I love Black Widow. And I had an idea for Black Widow that wasn't what got made. And like that idea ended up getting shelved and used for a different hero later on. And I worked on a new version, which wound up being the preparation version, which me and Caleb sort of co-authored. So yeah, it kind of accomplished the goal that I set out with that first version, which is I really wanted Black Widow to be very reactive and very like, I wanted Black Widow to do a lot of stuff on the enemy's turn. You know what I mean? And like less stuff on her turn. And so the preparations let us do that while still having her able to do some stuff on her turn, which is pretty cool. I'm getting into the weeds a little bit now.
No, that's what we're here for. These are Marvel Champions nerds, and they're glued to their AirPods now. So before we get into what Black Widow is, I would love to hear more about what Black Widow almost was, or what your kind of first interpretation of it was, if you can share that, and then where that ended up.
Essentially, a lot of the stuff that I wanted to do with Black Widow wound up being in Ghost Spider.
Ooh.
Okay.
Which you can
Not
kind of
what I
you can kind of see that DNA in there, and that Ghost Spider does a lot of things during the enemy's turn. So it was a lot of events that were reactions to the villain doing certain things or certain cards being drawn, and you would load up your hand with these reactions and hope that you could trigger 1 or 2 or 3 of them on the enemy's turn before you redraw. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I definitely know. Ghost Spider is my favorite of the Spider characters that we have so far in summer of 2024. I think she is. Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. No, that's
Imagining Ghost Spider coming out in Wave 1 would have been very different.
Yeah.
Wave 1 Ghost Spider would have been pretty sick.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah. Well, Maxine, do you remember the other Wave 1 heroes that you had to choose from? Can you name them all?
Oh, goodness. Can I name all the Wave 1 heroes?
Yeah. You didn't know pop quizzes were coming.
Pop quiz.
Yeah.
I hope you brought a pen and paper because you're going to need it.
There was Cap, there was Iron Man, there was Hulk. There was... Wait, was Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch in that Wave 1, or were they in the second wave?
No, they're Wave 2.
They were in Wave 2. Who am I forgetting?
And Iron Man was a core set hero, actually.
Was Hawkeye?
Well, that still counts.
No, Hawkeye was
No.
Wave 2. He was in the
Hawkeye was
box
also Wave
to kick
2.
off Wave 2.
Yeah, that's right.
It's okay if you don't know him. This is not
I don't
fair
remember all
for
of
me
them.
to ask.
It's been
We
a
were
while.
looking for middle names as well.
Yeah, middle names.
Yeah, full legal names only.
Yeah, full legal name and social security
yeah.
numbers. But it's fine.
I
you knew
remember
stuff.
that Hulk. I remember that Caleb really wanted to do Thor, and Boggs really wanted to do Hulk.
Hulk.
If I remember correctly.
Yes, that is true.
And Caleb was all over Cap, and it was the other 3 that I had to choose from, which was Widow, and then the other 2, which
Doctor Strange,
and
Miss Marvel.
right, and Miss Marvel. Yeah, that's right.
Can you tell us why Miss Marvel, the lone champion, ended up in the first wave?
It, like from a team, it's odd.
It was a little bit of I might be misremembering a little bit, but I know that Boggs was a huge Miss Marvel fan, and a few other people in the office were huge Miss Marvel fans as well. And there was definitely a desire to have not just like the classic movie characters, but some other like popular comic book characters as well. Because at the time, the Miss Marvel show had not come out, and and almost every other character in that first wave was like, you know, MCU all over the MCU.
Just about. I think like She-Hulk is the only one who wasn't.
Yeah. The MCU was huge back then. It was like at its peak.
Absolutely enormous. So there was a desire to have, and like Miss Marvel is an extremely popular comic book character, so it made a lot of sense.
I was super happy to see her.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that first wave is great. Hulk, boy.
Doctor Strange.
I don't know how much you know about Hulk,
Boy.
but Hulk is infamous in the community because he's terrible. And there's been interviews where Boggs has talked about the last minute design changes that went through with Hulk. It's not at all what he designed. And a lot of the things he designed for Hulk ended up in other heroes. And I'm sure, like you just mentioned with Black Widow, that's probably common, right? You have an idea and it's not quite right, or it's not quite right for this hero, and you put it on the shelf and it ends up somewhere else. A lot of the mechanics that were with Hulk ended up with Nova and Drax and some other heroes.
Spider-Ham.
And now Hulk is well known in the community as one. It's not controversial. He's one of the worst heroes in the game, and a lot of people are sad about it because he's such an iconic character that people, want to play Hulk, and then they're disappointed when they buy Hulk and sad trombone
and it's
sound.
Even more
I will say
disappointing that.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say it is pretty common in card game design to get to a certain point and have to redesign something because it's not working, and wind up with something that's not quite what you wanted. And at that point, all you can do is hope to bolster it with future content. That's certainly
a great
happened
thing about
in
a living
Arkham.
card game.
Yeah, it is. It is. It certainly happened in Arkham. It certainly happened in Lord of the Rings. It'll happen in any card game that's ever been made. But it is a shame when it does happen.
Yeah, so to kind of piggyback on that then, how often and this is broader than Marvel Champions, but how often when you go into a design how often would you say your original idea, when you sit down and start thinking about it, how often does that end up what it is? Or is it often just a lot different?
I would say about maybe half the time you go into it with an idea and it ends up being somewhat close to that idea, and the other half of the time it ends up being something completely different. And actually, the same is true for Penny Parker, but we'll get into that later. But as a designer, you really have to stay flexible and you have to stay fluid. You can't really get like stubborn about what you want it to be, because if it's not working, it's not working, and you got to change it. And there's so many different reasons why it could not be working. Some of which might be completely beyond your control. You know, sometimes it can be an art piece that gets rejected, and now all of a sudden you have a card that you need to completely change or cut completely, and it blows everything up, like that kind of thing. Sometimes, especially when you're working with licensors, sometimes a licensor can not approve something that you thought was going to be approved. So that can be a big deal as well. And of course, there's just playtesting. Like during playtesting, you got to stay flexible and you got to stay fluid, because if you don't, then you'll wind up with something that you're like, yeah, this is exactly what I wanted, and everyone hates it.
Yeah.
And that's never fun.
Oh, I'll ask one more question and I'll let the others take a chance here. What are some things, or one thing that you can think of that your work on Marvel Champions you took back with you to Arkham, that something you saw about how the game worked, maybe that's something you worked on specifically, or just the mechanics of that game, and what did you bring back to Arkham?
Yeah, so one big difference between the two games is in Arkham you play as an investigator, and you have your investigator card, and your investigator has strengths and weaknesses and abilities and deck building rules all of their own. But they don't have like a pack of cards that they come with that is like theirs, And I don't know if the timing of this works out, so I could be wrong about the order of this, but I'm pretty sure at the time that Marvel Champions was being made, we were working on the starter decks. There's 5 starter decks for Arkham, and each of those starter decks came with a host of new cards, and we tried to really theme them around those characters. So, for example, one of those characters is Nathaniel Cho.
He's my favorite.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Yeah.
And he's a boxer, so a lot of the cards in that set are boxing themed. You have boxing gloves. You have like a card that has like art of him like knocking out an enemy, and like he's going like this, the classic like victory pose where the ref is holding up his.
There's a card called "Get Over Here," which is another Marvel Champions card.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
And I would say that that's at least partly inspired by those hero packs, by those like sets of hero cards. It really made those characters stand out, and it made them feel, even though they weren't forced to take those cards, it really made them feel, when you're playing right out of that pack, right out of that starter deck, very cohesive and very like fleshed out, which was really cool.
Yeah, those are all excellent. I quite like that one. And I forget the name, the woman who fails all the time but gets a benefit for failing. Stella. Yeah,
Stella
those two are awesome.
Yeah, she's great.
All right, Lethus, you got a question you want to ask?
It's kind of a jumping ahead one, but since you're talking about the design of characters, so when you sit down and try to work on designing something, like what does that process look like for you? What do you sit down and go, okay, I'm going to make a game. Like, where does your brain go? What are you focusing on at first? And what does that process look like?
It really depends on the project. I mean, when making a game from scratch, if it's a game that is set in an IP, one of the first things that I'll do, or in the case of even just these heroes, is look up everything that I possibly can about that IP and really just like live in it for a little while. So for Arkham, I read every Lovecraft story. I played all of the previous Arkham games, which I already had, but like I spent a solid few weeks just living in Arkham world. And for Marvel, like when working on Black Widow, I read up on Black Widow. I read the Black Widow comics. I made sure to kind of since the game is based on the comics and not the MCU, I made sure to like sort of put the MCU out of my mind for a little bit and just focus on the comic book stuff, which I wasn't quite as familiar with, which was kind of interesting. But if
Black Widow comics gets weird.
Yeah, they do. But if it's a game that is just me messing around with components trying to make a cool game, then it's a completely different process. Then it's a lot of like, what do I want to accomplish with this game? What emotions do I want to inspire in the players? What's the point, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I'm the kind of person, I'm not as into games where it's just get the most points, you know, like victory point Euro style games. I like games where there is a point to them. There is an emotion that's being played with here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm on board. Yeah, I think like with Black Widow, one of the things I really like about that hero pack is that it's not that she's helpless moment to moment. Like she has her basic powers, she can do stuff, and anybody can play those preparations, but the way that she uses them, and it lets her accomplish a lot as long as she prepares ahead of time, feels like a really good embodiment of that character who's not as strong as all the actual super beings around her.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that was a really good. I still love that one. Kudos.
Yeah, people focus on like the acrobatics and like all of her cool gadgets and stuff, but really her superpower is being the best spy. Like her and Nick Fury, right? Like they're the ones who they have a plan for everything. And so yeah, you're right. Like it was the perfect embodiment of that, which is cool.
Safe House number 29 is a fantastically designed card. All right, I'm done.
Yeah. So Black Widow, I want to ask about something tangentially, but you mentioned her being a spy, of course, and she has the trait spy.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I always wonder about when you're designing games like this, LCGs, traits that are assigned to cards, how often is it a plan? And how often is it just future proofing and we'll throw a trait on because we think it might be something someday? And how often is it just like, this is a funny trait to give something and we're just going to put it on there?
Like Space Knight.
Yeah,
Space Knight.
Everybody's thinking Space Knight.
Everyone's thinking Venom, yeah.
Or Wakanda.
There's
I
definitely
don't know if that one's going to come up.
There's definitely been both. In all the games that I've worked on, there have been traits that were planned, traits that had like a mechanical impact. Like they don't have rules associated with them, but they mean something. Like all cards that share this particular line of text share this trait, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That especially was the case in like Netrunner, for example, where like subtypes really meant something. But when you're making a game from scratch, a lot of the times you're future proofing. You're just throwing words on there because you think one day we'll get to this.
Mm-hmm.
And that was definitely the case in Arkham. I remember like the traits was one of the last things that we did. And some of them are pretty obvious. Like, you know, you have a gun. So it has the item trait, the weapon trait, and the firearm trait, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that all makes sense. But then some of them are like a bit more out there. Like, what do you do with a card that has the paradox trait? Is that, and like that's an example of one I just threw on there because I think it was cute. I had like no expectations of utilizing the paradox trait in the future. Just thought it was cool. So we've definitely done both in the past. We try to plan out as much as we can, but in the end, especially in those early days, and when we're making a core set, we're flying by the seat of our pants. We have no idea what's gonna work, what's gonna not work, what's gonna be a powerful card, what's not gonna be a powerful card. We famously have cards in core sets that are so powerful they dominate the game for ages, and then cards that are just like immediately never going to be used ever, and that's just making a core set. Like yeah.
So the trait thing, one more follow-up question on that. Like, is there I'm a very like organized list making person, so in my mind I would think there's some kind of a roadmap here, right? Like, do you sit down when you're creating the game, especially an IP game like this from scratch, right? Marvel Champions, and I know you weren't as involved with the creation of this, but maybe you know. Do you sit down and think like, okay, here's the list of probable characters we'll have in this game someday, right? Like we have an idea of who we will likely include, Hulk and Spider-Man, etc. There's A-listers and B-listers, but like Black Widow, do you think like, okay, here's the probable characters who might be a spy, right? And in our game now, it's Gambit is a spy, right? Black Widow's a spy. I forget what other heroes are spies, but do you sit down and think
a spy? I think he's a thief.
Oh, he's a
Gambit's a
thief.
thief.
I'm sorry. He's a thief.
They have a card that
There's
shares
some
a
synergy there.
thing among them, but
But my question
they're
is the
basically
same, right?
the same thing, really. One's just sponsored by the government.
Do you have like lists of like, this is who will likely be Ariel, and this is likely who will be a thief, and this is that kind of stuff? Aside from the general teams, right? Like X-Men, Avengers, we know that stuff.
Yeah. Early on, I know that there were definitely lists that were made. Those lists went out the window pretty quickly as like the licensor got involved and as like high level strategy and executives started getting involved, because there's so much consideration that needs to be made. It's not just like, here's my 6 favorite characters to go into the first cycle and then they're approved. It is a multi-stage process that involves many, many, many people and all of their opinions. But as far as like when I was working on Arkham, I definitely made a list of all of the traits that we had put on cards already and thought of like, is this a trait that's going to have future uses that we're going to manipulate with other cards in the future? Or is this a trait that's just there? And even then, like the best laid plans, man, like we have, there's in Arkham, there are these skill cards and they're divided into innate and practice, right? And we thought like, oh, we'll have all kinds of cards that deal with that. We'll have cards that, search your deck for innate traits or search your deck for innate skills or, do stuff like that. And we didn't do anything with that for like 3 years. Like it wasn't until Silas Marsh, I think, that we did anything with the innate trait, Yeah, so sometimes, especially in these co-op LCGs, you only get so much room in every pack to explore all of the things that you want to explore. Inevitably, most of the stuff that you want to do gets cut on the cutting room floor, So much of those packs are taken up by the encounter and the scenario that you're playing. I hope that I kind of meandered there, but I hope that answers your question. Like,
no,
we definitely made lists and tried to plan out as much as possible, but like I said, like best laid plans doesn't survive contact with the enemy.
Yeah. Everyone has a plan till they get punched in the face, right?
Yeah.
As Mike Tyson said. So, okay, you're listed as a playtester for a lot of stuff in Marvel Champions. Did you playtest pretty liberally everything? Is there certain things you can remember working on more than others or that are particularly memorable to you? And when did you stop?
Yeah, I playtested the core set a lot. I remember that. I definitely playtested the first few like campaign boxes. So Galaxy's Most Wanted, Sinister Motives. I think the last thing that I ever playtested was, what was right before the first X-Men box? Was it the Infinity?
Spiders.
That was the Spiders.
Okay.
The Sinister Motives.
Sinister Motives.
Before
Sinister
that
Motives.
was the Thanos box.
Okay.
Before that.
So I think Sinister Motives might be the last thing that I playtested then.
Okay.
But I definitely playtested the Thanos box a lot because I remember sitting down with Caleb and playing the scenario where you're defending Avengers Tower and loving that scenario. I loved that scenario so much.
It's a good one.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
It's one of the better 2 villain ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great box, actually, top to bottom.
I like that box a lot. And I also remember reviewing the comic book story bits. I remember like Caleb threw some of those at me and was like, make the dialogue better. and I was like, no, it's good. Like I thought it was solid. So I was like, cool. You're fine, dude. you know comic books better than I do.
How much does the design team of Marvel Champions value the campaigns? there's a split in the Marvel Champions community. Like, there are some people who play this as standalone scenarios almost exclusively, and there are people who play the campaigns. And I think there's not a lot of middle ground. I am on the former. I play them as standalones. I will play the campaign maybe once, and I read the comic once. How much internally are they working towards that, and how much do they value that?
I know I can't tell about the current design team, but back when I was in the room, there was a lot of value placed on the campaign boxes and the campaign structure and everything like that. I remember there was a huge desire to make those campaigns like feel very different from one another and feel like worth it to go through the campaign with all the upgrades that you can get. And I remember that Caleb is especially excited for like having storylines that seed into like future storylines, kind of like the MCU did with the Infinity Gems and stuff like that. So I think there was a lot of value placed on it.
Interesting.
It doesn't surprise me that a lot of people play it as a standalone kind of game because it lends itself very well to that. But those campaigns are really cool. I would encourage you to play them if you're listening and you're like, try them out. They're really cool.
Yeah.
Follow-up question to that. Did you playtest the Galaxy's Most Wanted campaign?
I playtested the individual scenarios in the Galaxy's Most Wanted campaign. I don't believe I played through the campaign as a whole. Or maybe I did, but it was a very early version of it.
Okay.
And I remember very specifically, I played through the first 3 scenarios a lot.
So you played a lot of the Collector.
I played a lot of Collector, yes.
Oh boy, that one is notorious in the community.
Did you get comp pay for that? Or
yeah, that's
was that
not highly regarded in the community.
Unfortunately, I don't get comp pay for that. I volunteered.
Oh, okay, I thought they'd be paying you overtime or something.
Well, sometimes it used to be.
Galaxy Most Wanted.
Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, Galaxy Most Wanted is. It's not bad. It's just like some of those scenarios, specifically the Collector, is just so hard. It's so difficult and so punishing that I was wondering how the design process went on that, as to like how we ended up with this, because clearly like a bunch of people played it, and they were like, this is great, and I've played it and it's fun, but it's like so hard.
Yeah. I can't speak to why that specific box became so difficult, but what I will say is I've observed a phenomenon in these co-op LCGs that very often at like a certain mark, at like the 1 to 2 year mark, usually around like the 3rd product that comes out, there's a spike in difficulty. And that's because you have this vocal minority of players who are really like hankering for some very difficult content, and they become very vocal around that point of time. This is my theory anyway. I'm not sure if this is actually the case, but it happened with Lord of the Rings. The Against the Shadow box was incredibly, or Heirs of Numenor box and the Against the Shadow campaign that followed it, incredibly difficult. The Forgotten Age box in Arkham, also renowned for being incredibly difficult.
We played through that one.
Yeah.
That one's...
Yeah, and I think Galaxy's Most Wanted falls into that same exact paradigm of like, the game comes out, it's, the difficulty is just fine in terms of like it's there to be an introduction, so it's a little bit on the easier side, except for the final scenario, which is always bonkers, right? And people start playing it, first wave comes out, it's about exactly the same, because at that point we don't know anything. Like, the game hasn't come out by the time we're designing the first wave of content, so we have no idea what to expect, so it's about the same. And then it just spikes, and then you kind of get into your groove and fall into the difficulty that you really want it to be at,
It's just sort of the first content that comes out after you guys can like respond to feedback, and the feedback is always make it harder, and then you get Galaxy Most Wanted.
And then you get something that's bonkers hard, and then everyone's like, oh,
the game was rigged from the start. It was just destiny.
This so I guess following on from that, how do you deal as a designer with, obviously you put a lot of time into this, a lot of thought, and a lot of playtesting, and a lot of people touch it, and you have, like you said, all these layers of approvals and everything it goes through, and it's published. And inevitably, in all the games we've mentioned, I mean, I've played Lord of the Rings and Arkham pretty extensively, as well as this. There's always products that come out that the community wonders who playtested this, who approved this, right? And that's not to be mean, but they're I mean, the community people who are listening, they know Hulk, for example, we mentioned him earlier. He's one of those products that generally people are very unhappy with how he ended up. And so, but how do you deal as a designer with like the things you've worked on not being received well?
Sure. Well, you gotta have a thick skin anytime you're doing any creative work where you're pouring your heart and soul into something and then it goes public and people are looking at it for the first time. It's important to remember that, like, not important for you to remember, but important for us to remember that no matter how much playtesting we can possibly do, we could have a full year of playtesting with 300 people all playtesting at the same time. And the moment it gets released to the public, all of a sudden you have tens of thousands of people playing it. Like an order of magnitude more than you could possibly hope for playtesting. And we usually have like closer to 20, 30, 40, 50 playtesters. So like no amount of playtesting can prepare you for the order of magnitude of people who are going to play the product upon release. So we're really like when a product gets released, we're sitting there like biting our nails, like, oh my god, are they gonna like it? Like we have no idea what to expect. All we can go off of is our own instincts as designers and the feedback that we do get from playtesters. A lot of the time does conflict with what happens in the real world once it gets released, you know? Mm-hmm. Not necessarily saying that that's what happened because I wasn't there, but that's definitely happened to me in the past. And I've had experiences where I thought a card was bonkers good, gets released, everyone hates it. I've had experiences where I thought a card was going to be complete trash, card gets released, everyone thinks it's broken. Like, never know what to expect.
Yeah.
Kind of just got to roll with the punches.
Lethus, you have anything, or Lazy Titan, you guys want to ask before I move on?
I just had a question about like the general, it's going back a little bit, but the general game design process. Because obviously you and me, when we build decks in very different senses of the word. But are you building, or generally, are you going from like top down in like you're saying, this is Drax and I want Drax to attack and that's what I want to do, and you build cards that way? Or are you going sort of the other way of like, I want a hero that attacks, which hero is that fit to? Right. So, like, I want somebody who turns sideways all the time. I guess that ends up being Drax, or it ends up being someone. Is there a way you prefer, and is there a way that you think is maybe better for general game design?
I would say generally at FFG it was about 50-50. We would sometimes have heroes where we designed it completely top-down. Sometimes we'd have mechanics that we really wanted to do, and we would, like, fit it into a specific paradigm. I would say for Marvel, it was more likely the former, like more likely top down for almost all of the characters. Mm-hmm. And then for the aspect cards, a lot of those were probably designed bottom up. Like what's an effect that we want? We want to have in this cycle. We want to have, for example, like a bunch of justice cards that trigger upon defeating schemes. That kind of thing. Like, that might be a completely bottom-up design, and then you theme the card around that. Whereas the heroes themselves, Drax, for example, to go with your example, was probably, like... I'm trying to remember who designed Drax. I think it was Boggs. Probably, like, looked at Drax as a character and said, like, what is this person doing? What is this person good at? What does this person want to be doing in the game that we've designed? And obviously with
Drax the
attack.
Destroyer's
yeah, exactly.
what
does Drax like to do? Is it destroy? You know?
Yeah.
I think like that's a perfect example is like Rocket. Rocket is a very top-down design. There wasn't like a moment where the design team was sitting there like, we want to do a whole thing about overkill damage. No, it was just Rocket likes it when things explode, you know, into showers of gore. So that's that's Rocket. Like,
I imagine that has to do with the IP principle, right? Like,
yeah.
when you're working with IP characters, right? Rocket has to feel a certain way. Darth Vader has to feel like Darth
Yep,
Vader.
yep.
Spider-Man is Spider-Man. And in Arkham, it's different because you can think about mechanics and then just create a personality around that. So it's probably a slightly
Yeah.
different variance, right? Like,
Yeah, Arkham. So like Arkham is still an IP that we have an approval step for, but the license holder for the IP is us. So it's a very different process. With something like Marvel, with something like Warhammer, anytime you're working with an outside IP, yeah, you really want to capture, not just for approvals reasons, but like because the people playing are going to expect a certain thing, right?
Yeah.
They're going to expect Hulk to smash. They're going to expect Drax the Destroyer to destroy. And if they don't get, if Drax came out and he was like an investigative journalist or something, everyone would be like, what are you talking? Like, do you even know this IP? So it's important that we do our research and really like understand the IP as well as physically possible, you know? You're right that like with Arkham, I had a lot more creative freedom and creative liberty to kind of like make up characters, but once made, they became part of the IP. So that's even more pressure in a way, you know, because I'm defining this character for the future, and like that's a lot.
is there any?
But Nathaniel Cho.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was gonna say Nathaniel Cho could have been a bartender. Like,
Sure.
There's no,
Yeah,
there's
true.
no
Yeah.
limits there, so you can do kind of whatever you want.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is there any examples you can think of where Marvel pushed back or canceled an idea or a character you wanted to use? They said no, or you tried to do a certain take on it and they disagreed.
It's definitely happened, but off the top of my head, I'm not sure, and I don't want to like misrepresent something. But it's definitely happened in the past. Usually usually for a good reason. I don't think I can think of a time where there was pushback and it was like, oh, well, that's dumb. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it might have been because there was some future Marvel thing that we didn't know about. I know that, for example, Black Widow's nemesis wasn't originally Taskmaster, but we were told early that the villain in the Black Widow movie was going to be Taskmaster, and we were like, "Oh, well, that's a cool, easy way to get some recognition there for that villain." And it makes sense because she's fought Taskmaster in the comics as well. So we were like, "Okay, perfect. We'll swap out that nemesis." You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't even remember who the original nemesis was.
I heard in an interview that originally, and you may not have been involved in this one, but that Ant-Man and Wasp originally were supposed to be Hank and Janet, and they ended up being Scott and Nadia. And that was because of a Marvel, they pushed back, I guess, and said we would prefer these iterations of characters. But that may not have been ones you worked on.
Yeah, I didn't work on those, but that would not surprise me one bit if that were the case. Yeah, that sounds like exactly the kind of thing that would happen.
I am excited to talk about who I think is the most unique hero in the game, which is one of your designs. So I'm hoping you are excited to talk about and remember a lot about Penny Parker.
Penny Parker is probably the one I remember the most about.
Well, I am in luck then. I think Penny Parker, and Lethus and Lazy Titan can chime in too. It's not my favorite hero to play, but I think it is the most unique. Would we say that?
It's up there.
It does feel like a mini game. It feels like it feels like a mini game that you're playing. That's not quite Marvel Champions, but it is still.
Yeah.
So
like it.
When you were given this pack to design, Maxine, did they just say, we are doing a wave of spider adjacent characters, pick one? Or did they say, here's the list, pick one of these that you want to design? And then from there, how much of this is your original idea and how much of it was like, here's, did you get a shell, I guess, of here's a basic idea of Penny Parker? How did that work?
So whereas Black Widow was a bit more collaborative because me and Caleb went back and forth for a while on her design, Penny Parker, I kind of took that one. You know what I mean? And the process was a little bit different from so like what happened was we watched Into the Spider-Verse. That movie came out. It was amazing, obviously. That movie is incredible.
Great movie.
And
Go see it.
I begged on my hands and knees. I'm like, please, please let me do a Penny Parker hero. If you ever do Penny Parker, please let me do Penny Parker. And they were like, well, we're not even sure if we're going to do Penny Parker at all. But if we do, yeah, sure, you can do Penny Parker.
To be fair, that's a reasonable response.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Penny Parker is such an obscure character.
Such an obscure character. Such like
Yeah.
a C-list hero. Even
She's like 15 minutes of screen time in that movie.
15 minutes of screen time in that movie, and also in the comics, in all of the Spider-Verse comics, she's got like a few pages, and that's it.
Half
of,
of
like,
the
that
art
story?
is from like a single run of comics.
Yeah,
There
exactly,
aren't many
exactly.
issues of
There's
her
not.
at all.
There's not, and she's usually just a background character in these big Spider-Geddon comics that have like dozens and dozens of Spider characters. And there are certainly other characters that could have filled her spot, but I was just so excited to do Penny Parker that they were like, okay. And again, that has to go through all kinds of approvals too. That had to go up the chain, and I guess her being Into the Spider-Verse was enough of a push that it was like, yeah, she can be in the box. That's fine. Or in that wave rather. So I was hyped. So I immediately started getting to work on Penny Parker, but my vision of Penny Parker was a lot more influenced by the movie at that point in time. And I wound up having to completely redesign it after I read the comics, and I was like, oh, this isn't at all what the movie is a lot more like cutesy anime, and Penny in the comics is a lot more like Evangelion.
Yep.
In fact, it pretty much is just a giant Evangelion / Akira reference.
It's super jarring coming from the movie.
It is. It really is. Yeah. Although I side note, I really dig that in Across the Spider-Verse, they had in the very, very end, they had her actual robot, which is really cool. But anyway, so yeah, I kind of took that one and designed that one pretty much on my own. Just the hero cards. I didn't do any of the aspect cards.
So, how did you come up with the idea to have and I don't remember. I hope you remember all this stuff very well, but the different interfaces and the suit that detaches from the hero and attaches, and she can kind of get out. And then you have the resource generators with a very, very small hand size. One that when I first saw it, I wasn't even sure would work.
Immediately,
honestly,
it was like, oh, this character sucks.
but then it does work. I mean, we have other
Yeah.
examples of heroes with smaller hand sizes, and they can be difficult. I think Penny Parker takes some setup and is a slower hero, but once the interfaces are set up, you can generally play all the cards in your hand.
Yeah. A couple of things struck me when I was reading the comics. One, that like obviously Penny doesn't have any powers beyond her ability to pilot the robot. So most of the power has to come from the robot. And that's what led me to designing like all of the upgrades that attach to the spider suit. And the other thing that struck me was it's not like Iron Man where he gets in and then he kind of is the suit. She really is piloting like a mech, she's not controlling it 1-to-1 like Iron Man does, lifting the arm and then it lifts the arm. It's more like it really is more like piloting a vehicle, and I wanted to represent that somehow. I really wanted like her to get in the vehicle. You know what I mean? Like I wanted the vehicle to be a card and her to be a card and like her get in it. And so a lot of what you see there with Penny is like me trying to accomplish that goal of like getting the pilot card to go into the cockpit,
Super cool.
It's such a unique idea. Lethus, do you have something you want to say about Penny?
Yeah, well, just saying, I think everybody probably agree you nailed that really well. Like, one of the things that makes playing her unique is that, again, unlike Iron Man, like Iron Man can do all the things every turn, but Penny has to kind of choose which thing she's doing on which turn with the same set of things in front of her. So like she has all those upgrades, but how is she using them on this turn as opposed to last turn? Or is she emphasizing her ability to attack things right now or defend and survive? Like, yeah, that was really cool.
So
Thank you.
you said you didn't design any of the aspect cards that came in that pack?
Right.
It's interesting because Penny comes with a very memorable set of aspect cards. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lethis and Lazy Type, but I think she came with Limitless Stamina and the Repurpose package, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Limitless stamina, yes.
Yeah, Limitless Stamina is awesome card.
Woo, go Drax.
Yeah.
Represent.
But that created kind of a new barrier with these 14 hit point heroes that has to be taken into account now.
They're very careful with now. Wolverine came out and they gave him 14 , but
they gave him 10 and then 4 with an
They
upgrade.
gave 10 with the workaround.
Yeah. Printed.
So it's got 14 hit points, but it's not. It says printed specifically, which is super important because Symbiote Suit came out that same cycle, so it didn't say printed. Everyone does it.
Yeah.
That's a good.
But she came with Repurpose too, which is I won't get into that. That's an aspect card you didn't design, but it fits really well with Penny and is a strong card.
Did you choose what aspect she would have for the hero pack?
I did, yes. Did I? So like, I probably pitched her as protection, but I also think that she fell into that role solely due to where other people in that cycle already were, which happens quite often, that you'll have at least one hero where it's just like, why is this hero this aspect? And it's like, well, it's because all the other ones were taken, you know? But I'm pretty sure I pitched her as protection, which made sense to me at the time. I didn't pick any of the cards that went in her pack, but I did review her pack after all of those were decided and was like, yep, that seems great. Like you said, like these cards really combo with her. I know that when they're designing the aspect cards, they design them as one large pool and then divvy them up. Although sometimes they'll design an aspect card with someone in mind. So that's like, all right, this one automatically goes in this pack because that's for this character. But a lot of times it's like, where can we put this card where it makes the most sense and has the most impact? And so I'm sure something like Limitless Potential, for example, it's like, well, that's obviously going in Penny's pack because she's the high hit point character for that wave, you know?
Is there anything in the game that you designed that didn't see the light of day that you're allowed to talk about?
Oh, gosh. Whether or not I'm allowed to talk about them is a question that I don't know if I have the answer to. I'll be completely honest. There's at least 2 heroes that I had pretty much fully designed. One of which I not only had the hero design, but I had like the aspect cards that would go with them designed. And I'm trying to be very vague about who they are. And
Ghost Rider.
And I was so, and I knew I designed them for no reason other than like, this is a character that excites me, right? Or characters that excite me. And so I was like, I'm just going to throw this into what we call the slush folder, which is a folder of just like ideas, right? And you guys can use it if and when you ever get to that character. And they've just never gotten to that character.
So there's at least 2 heroes that you say that you designed that have not been released under other designs. Those heroes are still unreleased.
Yes. And I don't want to say who they are because there is a slim but possible chance that they could tap me to do the final design on those heroes when they get to them. Which would be pretty awesome if I could do that. But it all is going to depend on my schedule and where things fall. And there's also a chance that they get to those heroes and they're like, nah, we're not going to use that design. We're going to take our own crack at it, which is totally viable.
Can you tell us, and if you say no, I'll just cut this later. Can you tell us if they're like A, B, or C listers? That's all I'll ask.
Ooh.
Are they like big characters?
Pretty please?
No,
or are they
they're
like
not.
Cherry on top?
They're
They're
definitely not A-listers.
Ghost Spider's cousin.
Ghost Spider's ex-roommate's sister. No, they're definitely not A-listers because my favorite comic book characters happen to be like extremely like obscure. You know what I mean?
Condiment Man.
But the one that I had I was really, really proud of this one design. I would say B-lister, maybe.
Okay.
So not quite A-lister, maybe C, but like a B and a half, you know what I mean? Or C and a half, I guess. Somewhere between a C and a B.
lister. Okay.
Okay.
I know who I hope it is. But
Oh boy.
This is so like to show you, and this is not a spoiler of who I was. This is not at all. But to give you an example of like the kind of comics that I like, my favorite Marvel comic is The Runaways. So like obscure, you know what I mean? Like no one knows The Runaways.
I mean, I think we have some obscure characters in the game already, I would say.
Oh, for sure.
Of which Penny is one.
There's some characters in the game that even I'm like, what? I have no idea who that person is.
I did not expect to get Nadia Van Dyne. Like, that's such an odd.
Early on, too.
That's a weird pick.
Did you have anything to do with the design of the Vision Hero Pack?
The Vision Hero Pack.
I actually have a sort of related question to that.
No.
He's my favorite hero in the game, so I'm just curious.
I would say the hero that I had the most involvement with that I didn't actually design is Spectrum. And that's mostly because I was addicted to Spectrum, and I played a lot of Spectrum in playtesting. So much so that like I wound up having lots and lots of feedback about Spectrum, but I never played the Vision Hero in playtesting.
Okay. I'll forgive you. Lazy Titan, you had a
Sort
question?
of tangentially related. I feel like I have to ask, but for a former member of the podcast, Kaiko, was Silk on the list of spiders to pick from? And if so, why wasn't it picked?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't think so.
I had to ask.
I don't think Silk was, and because I'm trying to think who Penny would have taken the spot of, and I think it probably would have been someone else from Into the Spider-Verse, in all likelihood.
Spider-Man Noir or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Or another one of the Spider-Geddon kind of characters, like Hobie Brown, for example. Yeah,
I would take Hobie Brown.
Hobie Brown would have been sick. I will say that much. Like that
Love
would
a
be
spider
cool.
anarchist.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mean you think he would have been so sick that it would have been one you might have been interested in?
Like
And
maybe
maybe
a
would've
B-lister character
worked
that maybe you
on?
design?
as a consolation prize for not being able to do Penny, being able to do Hobie Brown would have been a pretty cool like second place.
Do you still play the game? Do you still play Marvel Champions? Or did you ever play outside of playtesting?
I definitely played a lot outside of playtesting. Yeah, I haven't played in a while, unfortunately. I just haven't had the time, and I haven't had the. I find the game the most fun to play with like a group, and I've been sequestered for a little while, in my little hidey hole. You listeners can't see, but I'm in a little nook. This is my nook, and I kind of live in this nook. And I haven't played any group board games in a while, except for like a running Kingdom Death campaign with some of my friends. So I haven't played in a bit.
I'm gonna run through. We have a series of questions we ask every guest. So I'm gonna run through. If you don't have an answer, that's okay.
Sure.
But I'm gonna give you the same questions.
Absolutely.
So, do you have a favorite hero in the game?
Penny Parker.
Okay, one you didn't design.
One I didn't design. It would either be Spectrum or Hawkeye.
Ooh, Hawkeye is a good shout.
Hawkeye is a really cool character that I think doesn't get as much love as he deserves. Not like in card game form, but just in general. He's just such a cool character, and I loved the Hawkeye show. And after the Hawkeye show came out, I read the Hawkeye comic, which was incredibly good, and it really like renewed my love for this character that I didn't really care about before. And
right.
I love like the design of the hero. I like the quiver holding the arrows, and like all the arrows doing different things is just so cool. Like I was a big fan of that design.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have a favorite aspect?
I think Justice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite or primary player count when you play the game?
I like to play with 3 or 4. I think that's where I have the most fun, just because the hero ends up, or the villain ends up with an enormous pool of health. Yeah. And I find that to be the most where it feels like a Marvel villain, where you require this team of heroes to take them down. That's my jam.
Quick tangent on that, side question. What player count is it the game tested at the most? Do you test it at all player counts? 1, 2, 3, 4? Or is it generally like one player count that gets play tested more than others?
It definitely gets play tested at all player counts in general, but internally we play a lot of three and 4 player games. But externally, when we have these groups that we are communicating with online, a lot of them are like a couple, like a husband and wife, or a group of friends who are just like they get together every now and then and they play a game, or a lot of them are just one solo person. So I would say we get 2-player playtests the most, followed by maybe single-player playtests, and then 3 and 4 we play a lot of internal games because we can actually get those people together to play physically, like in front of us, and that's really helpful.
I know that the true solo experience is very different from a multiplayer game.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that comes up in the design process? Are you designing certain cards with any player counts in mind at all, or no?
Oh, I'm sure that there's definitely cards, especially like leadership cards. There's a lot of leadership cards that are designed with multiplayer in mind. And there's definitely cards that are designed for solo players in mind as well. But we try not to do that with heroes. And I'm saying we as if like I've been a part of the team for the last
Your name
year
is on
now,
some of
but
these things,
I,
Maxine,
yeah,
so
that's
you
true.
can say we.
That's true.
Your name's in the credits, so you can say we.
Old
Yeah.
habits die hard.
Pretend you're French.
That's true. Well, also at this point, I am so divorced from the current design team that I don't even know what they're working on right now. Which is an interesting feeling.
Likely story.
Mhm.
No, it's for real. I was mentioning before you hopped
Yeah,
on that
sure it
I
is.
did not even know that the Magneto hero, which just got announced, was coming. I had no idea. So I was like, oh, cool. Like, good job, Caleb. Like, I'm into this.
Okay, and then the last question that we ask everybody is, what's your favorite villain or scenario to play against?
Ooh, I really like the Venom villain.
Mm.
I like the I like the pattern of like having to. I like that Venom has a weakness that you have to exploit, and I like that it feels like Venom feels like a raid boss in like Destiny or something. Like he has a damage phase. I love that.
Yeah.
I think that that's super cool. You know, I would
Yeah,
love to
with
see
the
more
bell
heroes
tower.
like that. Yeah, with the bell
Yeah.
tower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Lethus, do you want to ask another question here?
Yeah. Just what led you to working on games, and what made you want to do this in
Yeah.
the first place?
I blame my dad mostly. So
Don't we
growing,
all?
my dad's actually a game designer. He's made a few games back in like the 80s and 90s, and he hasn't made anything in a while. But growing up, he's really big into like the Euro-y games, and we had a game night that we would host like every Friday night. And it would be him and all of his friends who are all like in their 40s and 50s, and then like me as like an 8-year-old kid, and it was very awkward. But like I would play with them, and I got really into board games at a very young age because of that. And my dad had this like wall of bits of just like pieces that he's cannibalized from all of these games that he's owned over the years that he would use to construct his own things. So naturally, I started doing the same thing. And I would make my own little card games on like index cards, and I would bring them to middle school, and I'd play them with my friends.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I had a long running middle school game where it was like StarCraft, but like on graph paper. Yeah, like I had a master map that had the full map, and everyone was in different corners of the map. And then everyone else had a version of the map that was like fog of war over, right? And they would give me orders for their units. They would slip them into my locker. And I would go and I would open up my locker, and I'd have all these orders filling out, and I'd be like, all right, so he's moving his infantry up there, and he's moving his tank over there. And
That's fantastic.
yeah,
Analog
it's pretty great.
StarCraft is not what I thought you were going to say.
No, straight up analog StarCraft is exactly what it was. More like Command and Conquer, but I actually got in trouble. I actually got in trouble because I had this, I had all this info for this game, and a teacher walked by and saw it and sent me to the principal's office, and I was super embarrassed. But
Because you had military orders on your notebook?
yes, exactly. I had like the stats for different
Troop
weaponry.
movements and stuff?
I had stats like rifle, 10 damage, costs $3. Pistol, you know what I mean? And she sees this and she's like, "What is this?" And she sent me immediately to the principal's office, and I had to explain what a game is. It was so awkward.
Best defense.
Yeah, seriously.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Sounds like a desperate defense to me.
But
Oh,
Let's go.
I
That's a
love
big
that.
full circle, love it.
Okay.
So yeah, I was
retiring.
into creating games for a very long time, and it became like a long-term hobby of mine. I made like a big role-playing game that we played all throughout college, and by the time that I was in grad school, I was making Lord of the Rings content online and just posting it on Board Game Geek because that's where you post custom content in those days. And because stuff like Discord didn't even exist back then. And so when I applied for the job, they already knew who I was because they had seen that stuff. They had seen me like make this custom content on Board Game Geek, which
It's a pretty good intro.
yeah, it was pretty cool actually.
By the way, I do this job for free. You want to pay me?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, by the way, this scenario that I designed has like several thousand downloads, and I have no resources. Would you like to give me some resources?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How plugged in are designers to the custom community? Because all these games have their own custom community, including Marvel Champions. Is that something? Obviously, they're aware of it. Is that something that they interact with or mess around with at all?
Extremely not plugged in by intent. Like, it's not an official rule of FFG, but it was a rule that I definitely adhered to, and a lot of other designers that I know adhere to, because A, they don't want to be accidentally inspired by a fan's card, and because that would be very unfortunate. B, we want the homebrew people to know that when they make something, we're not going to steal it. So we intentionally avoid all of that stuff. So there's like entire Arkham campaigns that I haven't played that fans have made, and I still haven't to this day, although I should at this point because now I have no excuse. Because like we don't want players to think that we're stealing their content, and we don't want to accidentally be inspired and accidentally steal content without even realizing it. So we tend to avoid that stuff, but not because we don't love it. I adore it.
Do you ever have scenarios where you're at conventions you just need to like la 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 la? I can't see what you're doing. I can't see what you're doing.
No, and in fact, there have been a couple times I've broken my own rule where I played a scenario that a fan made because they brought it to me and they wanted me to play it, and I'm not going to turn them down. But yeah, I don't usually like plug my fingers in my ears and go la 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 la.
Well,
I don't go seeking it out. Yeah.
Yeah. You are now in 2024 no longer with FFG.
Correct.
And was it last year, 2023, or was it just this year that you left FFG?
It was, I think, January of this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you've moved on to a new company and new games. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? And then, what your role is with this new game that we will mention shortly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then maybe the same thing we did for Arkham Horror. Maybe you can pitch that game to, Marvel Champions players.
I would love to. So I now work for Earthborn Games. Earthborn Games is a small company that is made up almost entirely of ex-FFG employees. Not intentionally. It's just kind of panned out that way. The head of studio is Andrew Navarro, who used to be the head of studio for FFG like a few years back. And the mission statement of Earthborn Games is wanting to make games in a sustainable way. That is to say, like, no plastic components, no shrink wrap, everything is like compostable. The idea is in 300 years, when this game has broken down into its raw components, it will just be biodegradable. Like, that's the hope, right? So we trying to make games as green as possible, so to speak. And our first and currently only game, Earthborn Rangers, is a game that I didn't have a hand in designing originally, but I'm super excited to work on. I'm now the lead game designer for Earthborn Rangers. And Earthborn Rangers is... How best to describe Earthborn Rangers? So the world is like a not post-scarcity, but like we've fixed the climate change problem in a very drastic and desperate way by kind of revitalizing the world with technology. So the game is kind of about being in harmony with the earth, and you are a ranger who's meant to serve the people of the valley and help them with their individual struggles and go around and like kind of make sure that the ecology of the valley remains intact and nothing threatens it. It's a very, very different and very interesting game, but it does share some of that DNA with the FFG card games, the co-op card games, that you'll see a lot of similarities. You take control of a singular character. Your deck is all of that character's gear and talents and companions and such. And there's even a little bit of a character creation element to the game, which is really cool. But the major difference is it's a much more open world kind of experience. You're given some basic tasks at the outset, but then beyond that, you're just told, go wherever you want, do whatever you want. It's very open, and you wind up picking up missions, you talk to people, you learn about their troubles, you pick up missions along the way. There is a main plot that will happen, but it kind of, you're a proactive, like, part of that plot, which is really cool. It doesn't just, like, kind of happen to you. And it's a really, really interesting game, and I love it. I love it so much.
Question.
Yeah.
So I've actually not seen Earthborn Rangers. I've never played. I may have to at this point. But when you say Ranger, do you mean like Lord of the Rings Aragorn Ranger, or do you mean like Smokey the Bear? What is the aesthetic that we're running with in this game?
Closer to Aragorn, but imagine a futuristic version where you have
it's like futuristic fantasy.
It is. It's exactly that. Yeah, it's futuristic fantasy. Cool. It's like post Armageddon, like the things that could have made the Earth inhospitable have come and gone, and now we've come out and like reclaimed the world. But so it's like it's very interesting. It's like primitive and futuristic at the same time. You know what I mean?
Very cool.
It has kind of a Breath of the Wild vibe. If I may say so.
That's what I was starting to think.
So it feels kind of like tranquil and peaceful, but there's like also littered with this technology that clearly seems out of time or place.
I've heard it described as like reverse Fallout.
Yeah.
Which fits pretty well.
There's an intro in the game written by Andrew that goes through like the inspirations and like why it is what it is, but it's definitely like, what if Fallout turned out okay?
What if Fallout went right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
so
it's that kind
for
of everyone
vibe.
Who hasn't played Fallout yet.
Yes, spoiler, yeah. Fallout spoilers.
Fallout's been out for a long time.
Sorry, everybody in 2012.
That's so funny.
If the name Fallout didn't really get you there, I'm sorry. Your reading comprehension skills could use some work.
So, what drew you to Earthborn? I imagine someone with a catalog of work and a resume like yours could have gone a number of places.
Possibly. I'm a big fan of their mission statement, and I'm a big fan of, it's really nice getting to integrate with a bunch of people I already know and that I already like respect and who respect me. That's awesome. It kind of just, the opportunity arose at the perfect time for me. I can't speak too much into like why I left FFG, but suffice it to say that this was an opportunity that I couldn't possibly turn down, and it wound up being a really good decision because I'm loving the work that I'm doing, and I'm super excited for the future. Yeah.
There is so I have not finished my campaign of the first Earthborn Rangers. I have started about a third of the way through.
Mm-hmm.
And because I have a problem, I already kickstarted the rest of it and it's
Heck yeah.
coming. So
Heck yeah.
how much influence do you have on that product, or will you have had by the time it comes out? And if not, when is the first kind of Maxine Newman Earthborn project going to see light?
Great question. So the core set
Thank you.
campaign,
I thought of it myself.
The core set campaign I had no involvement in. And the first expansion, the first campaign expansion, which is what you're referring to, it's called Legacy of the Ancestors. It was already pretty much fully designed by the time that I joined. But as soon as I joined, they were like, well, let's get Maxine's eyes on this product because it's not done yet. So we can make any tweaks if necessary. So I did very, very aggressive playtesting on Legacy of the Ancestors, along with the rest of the design team. And wound up doing quite a few tweaks here and there. Did some writing, added some stuff, redesigned a mission. So there's some of me in there, but it's maybe like 5-10%. It's not like a ton. But there's some of me in there. The first Ranger pack, I didn't have too much. The first like pack of new Ranger cards, I didn't have too much involvement in aside from playtesting. And like a couple revisions here and there, and maybe a couple flavor text sort of writing as well. As far as my first like full-fledged product with Earthborn, I can't even say when that will be announced because I have no idea.
It's a ways out still, or
it's probably a ways out. Yeah.
Okay.
We're still waiting on Legacy of the Ancestors.
We haven't gotten
at this
it yet.
point.
It's so different and so interesting, the life cycle of games when you're working in a smaller company that does crowdfunding. It's a very different life cycle, and it works very differently than, say, at FFG. And there's a lot more lead up time, I would say, in Earthborn. Which is good because it means that we have the time to really make it as good as physically possible. So I can't say when the stuff that I'm working on currently will be announced, but it probably won't be for a little while. That being said, I do have... So Earthborn has something called one-day missions. You can find them on the Earthborn Games website. They are exactly what they sound like. They're missions that are meant to be completed in one day, one in-game day. Every game session in Earthborn Rangers is a day in the life of your ranger. So there's 2 on the website currently. There's a third one that I made that is on the way. It'll probably be out by the time that this podcast releases.
Okay.
So if you play Earthborn Rangers, definitely check that out. They're free. You can just play them right from the website. I mean, you can't play them from the website. You need a copy of the game. But the mission itself is free. And it's just new content. It's just cool.
Go buy the game.
Go buy the game. It's a good game. It's a very good game. If you're interested in seeing a review of it, you can check out Shut Up and Sit Down their review. Shut Up and Sit Down's review of the game.
Yeah, they were glowing.
Very glowing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a favorite Earthborn Rangers aspect?
Ooh, that's tough.
Aggression.
The deck that I've been using on all of the playcasts, we do like bi-weekly playcasts, which you can check out on YouTube, is a 3-spirit deck. So that's like my high aspect is spirit. But I tend to abuse fitness cards the most in that deck. So it's kind of hard for me to say that spirit's my favorite when actually my favorite card in that deck is a fitness card.
Fair enough.
Okay, I get it.
It's a very different kind of deck building process because you use all 4 aspects. It's not like in Marvel where you pick an aspect and then that's kind of all you do. You use all 4 aspects sporadically, and you just have different levels in each of them. So you could be like, my character is a 1 awareness, 3 spirit, 2 fitness, 2 focus character, for example.
All right. Well, this has been super, super exciting and enlightening, and then we really appreciate your time, Maxine. Thank you for coming on the podcast and talking about a game that you worked on years ago and is not your main game. But for
so much.
everybody who, didn't get enough of you in this podcast and wants to know more, where can they find you? What else are you working on? Please tell us all that.
Sure. Well, you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter username is @natsunoyoru. I won't spell that, but you can just search my name, MJ Newman. It'll pop up. I spend most of my online presence is there, but I also have a website. It's www.bewaretheblackcat.com. And on my website, you can see that I wrote a book. And you can purchase copies of that book on my website or on Amazon or wherever books are sold. It's called The Key in the Crescent, and it's very cool. I've heard it described as Sailor Moon meets Nightmare on Elm Street, which is a pretty apt description. Yeah.
Well, imagine for yourself, for just a second, listener, that you have just walked into an elevator. You're going up to your office. You're trying to get about your morning. You got your coffee in your hand. You hit the button to go up, and Maxine jumps on the elevator. Suddenly, you have 30 seconds in the elevator with Maxine. She's going to pitch this book to you and tell you all about it. What are you going to say, Maxine? As we're holding our coffee, getting ready to go to work, how are you going to get us psyched up for your book?
Do I just read from the back of the book? No. It's about a young girl with narcolepsy who discovers that she has the ability to hop into the dreams of and nightmares of her friends and loved ones and fight that which troubles them. And in the process ends up learning a lot about herself and about the world that she's in and that kind of thing. And travels to all kinds of majestic and fantastical realms filled with horrible, nightmarish creatures that do lots of decapitation.
Well, as someone who mentioned to you that at the beginning of this podcast that I am in the middle of the Dream Eaters cycle of Arkham Horror, that sounds like we've really come full circle. And now I'm imagining all the things I just read about in that latest scenario. But that sounds awesome. I will put links down below to your website and everything else in the show notes or the description if you're on YouTube. And thanks so much for coming and spending this time with us talking about the game. It has really been awesome. You have been super generous with your time and telling us all this stuff, but I have enjoyed it tremendously, so thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast.
And everybody else who listened, all 4 of you that are still out there, thank you for getting this far. If you enjoyed it, if you're having a good time with the podcast, please take 30 seconds, rate and review us on whatever platform you're on. And as always, if you didn't enjoy it, then please find a better way to spend your time. Thank you. We will see you. The next episode is episode 44, all about Avengers Mansion. That'll be out next week. So come back and we'll talk to you then. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Adios.
Bye.
Bye.